Hello, everyone, and welcome to A New Direction. My name is Jay Izso, and oh, man, we're going to get rebel. You know what I'm talking about, man? We are going to get rebel when it comes to leadership. Oh, you think you know what I'm saying, right? Well, you really don't, right? Because I got with me Larry Robertson. Oh, man, the book, Rebel Leadership, game changer. Just telling you, game changer. All right. I don't care what your business is. I don't care if you're nonprofit, for profit. I don't care if it's your family. I don't care if it's a small group. Folks, I'm just telling you, this book has got answers that you have never thought about. Yeah, that's rebel leadership. And Larry Robertson's with us. And I'm just telling you right now, you're going to love him. Okay. You're going to absolutely love him. He is insightful. And he has really done his homework on this book. I'm telling you, I read so much research and he has interviewed so many amazing leaders, right? And how their organizations have become rebel in terms of leadership. That's a hint. That's a hint. Okay. But before we get to him, let's do what we do every week, right? Listen, we are four-part people. We are physical, mental, emotional, spiritual people. Larry's going to talk about how that all intertwines actually when it comes to rebel leadership. The fact of the matter is it takes action. That's the physical, right? It's going to take some mental agility. That's part of rebel leadership. It's going to take some emotional acumen. That's part of rebel leadership. And you know what? There's a spiritual element to it too, that there's this kind of the spirit soul part of it. Hard to explain, but that exists. That is part of rebel leadership. That's really all four of them are part of his book. That's what makes this book so cool. But let me tell you what we're going to do. We're going to talk about where you're at right now, right? These four areas: physical, mental, emotional, spiritual, right? This is what makes us make us up, right? Every day. And, you know, we've interviewed all these special operations forces guys, and they keep telling us, you got to work on every area of your life every day. You have to be working on yourself every day in full for these areas. And if you're not, it's because you see in life, if you're not growing, you're dying, because we never stay still. We never stay static. Sounds a lot like rebel leadership. Isn't that something? So let's go through these four areas. All right. Physically, on a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being my training's not going well, 10, my training is awesome. How would you rank yourself in terms of your exercise, eating right, drinking enough water, getting enough sleep? All right. 5 is average. Okay. That's your first number. Now, whatever your number is, don't worry about that. It's not about, you know, like, oh my gosh, you know, Jay, I've really not been taking care of myself. And I'm really kind of a 3. Okay, let's get to a 3.5, right? And we'll get to a 10, but let's do baby steps, all right? It's okay, right? The point is I know where I'm at and how I know what are the things I need to do to change to get going in that direction, right? Because you're going to find a new direction physically. All right, so then what about mentally? Well, my wife always says, don't be a mental loafer, right? Don't sit on the couch and let things just come at you. You need to be an active participant in your mental growth, meaning that what are you doing to learn, to enhance your ability to do your job, to do your life, in your career, in your business? What are you doing to enhance that? And what are you doing to exercise both halves of the brain, right? We got that right side of the brain, it's a little more creative. Got the left side of the brain, it's a little more logical. What are you doing to make those sides better every day, right? Whatever it is, it could be reading a book like Rebel Leadership. That could be a book. You could take up an instrument. You can, you know what, learn a foreign language. There's a lot of ways you could do that, but enhance it. So on a scale of 1 to 10, how would you say you're doing? Okay, you have 2 numbers. Now the third number, the emotional number, right? Interestingly enough, Larry in his book talks about Daniel Kahneman. He talks, and Daniel Kahneman is responsible for what we call really emotional intelligence and emotion quotients. He really is, right? And here's the thing, right? We're going to break it down to just really 2 simple things. One is, how well are you able to control your emotions under stress and pressure? And then 2, how well are you able to tap into and understand the emotions of others? If you don't think those are important to rebel leadership, think again, right? Because you do have to stay under control, and you do need to understand the emotions of other people. Matter of fact, he has a whole subsection called Agree to Disagree. That sounds like emotional intelligence to me. So on a scale of 1 to 10, how would you say you're doing in your emotional area? Right? Then finally, the fourth area, right? It's the spiritual area. And, you know, Larry talks about in his book, the soul, right? He talks about how people have like this push, this oomph, this something inside of them that really pushed them to do something, and that regardless of the amount of money, that they were going to do it, because it was almost as if there was something, an impetus that they couldn't explain. A lot of times they call it soul. Larry also talked about it was also called the spirit side, right? Because we are spiritual. We really are. There's a thing called heart, right? That we label out there that Larry talks about in his book, by the way. Right? And here's the thing about heart. The thing about heart is it is a spiritual thing of this will. It's this will, this thing inside you that keeps going in spite of the odds. The spiritual area also entails things like, what gets you back to center? What keeps you at peace in the midst of chaos? Which, by the way, a rebel leader is going to need to have. Right? So on a scale of 1 to 10, and by the way, it could be God, it could be nature, it could be meditation, whatever it is. The question is, how is it working, and is it working? And then what do you need to do to enhance it? So what would you give yourself on a scale of 1 to 10? All right, you have 4 numbers. Those 4 numbers are like the legs of the chair. And you know what? The chair legs are uneven. You know what? It's really bad on your posture. At the same time, the truth of the matter is, if the chair's too low, you can't eat at a table and eat nutritiously. Speaking of someone, though, who's got all of his legs at the right height and they're really moving up in the right direction, his name is Larry Robertson. He is an innovation advisor who works, writes, and guides at the nexus of creativity, leadership, and entrepreneurship. He's the author of 2 award-winning books, A Deliberate Pause, Entrepreneurship and Its Moment in Human Progress. Suggest you look that up. And The Language of Man, Learning to Speak Creatively. Creativity, to speak creativity. Is it creativity or creatively?
Creativity.
Creativity. Okay. Thank you. I wanted to make sure I didn't have that down wrong. Get that book too. His 3rd book, Rebel Leadership, which we're going to talk about today, released in June of 2021. Rave reviews. Mine will be up there shortly. As founder of Lighthouse Consulting, he has over 25 years guided organizations and their leaders through uncertainty, change, and growth to lasting success. A popular columnist and speaker, he has a unique ability to bring his audiences into the story and help them craft and realize their own success story. In 2021, he was named a Fulbright Scholar, which is a rarity for non-academic professionals. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the show, and welcome to the first time to A New Direction, Larry Robertson. Welcome, Larry.
Jay, thank you for that very warm introduction, and I'm really excited to be here.
I am really excited to have you here. Honestly, the book is terrific. I really did enjoy it. You have a chapter which we would normally call an introduction. You call it an opening, and you speak about Tom Koalopoulos, and we talk about the new truth that exists out there, and it is that we live in a more uncertain than certain. The world that we live in is more uncertain than certain. A fact most of us have yet to fully embrace. Do you still find that to be true?
Increasingly so, I guess is the best way to put it. And, it's really interesting because our natural filter is to want to take any newness that comes as an uncertainty, especially any newness that comes as an uncertainty that feels like a threat to something we have or something we want to accomplish. We want to think of that as finite. And the kind of uncertainty that keeps flowing at us is not finite. It's continuous, and it really requires a completely different response than, oh, there's the problem. Let me come up with an answer to fix it and move on.
You in the subsection of this introduction or the opening, you talk about the new abnormal, and you give us some statistics, and I just want to share these with folks. In 2017, PricewaterhouseCoopers survey of 1,749 CEOs, scanning dozens of sectors and countries, 82% of leaders said that the economic future of their organization was unpredictable. That's a huge number. What was more
stunning, isn't it?
Yeah,
4
it
and
is.
5.
Yeah, and then you go on to say that, by the way, that hasn't changed in 10 years.
Yeah, it's absolutely true. So this is something that I'm always astonished at how few people know about it, but there are organizations, a lot of them are large professional service firms like a PwC or an EY. They have access to lots of leaders. They do these annual leadership studies, and they're really quite remarkable because no matter who's doing it, they tend to have between 1,000 and 3,000 respondents, leaders across sectors, often across the globe, at different levels of leadership. And what I find really powerful about these studies is that they're confidential. So when leaders answer the questions that they're asked, their inclination, their propensity to be honest is really, really high. And even though every one of these studies varies in some way, they try to make it fresh every year, they always ask some form of the question, what's the environment like that you are dealing with, that you and your team have to contend with? And so that statistic you just pointed to in that 2017 study, and recognize that, first of all, it was nearly 2,000 respondents. And again, it was confidential, and it was pre-pandemic. And 82% of those leaders, didn't matter what the sector was, didn't matter what the level of leadership was, used one word to describe the environment: unpredictable. And as you pointed out, they had been using that same one word description for almost a dozen years at that point. And that's before COVID. So it's really, if you think about it, leaders were saying, and they could, because it was confidential, that they weren't sure how to lead in this uncertainty. And I think that's a really eye-opening revelation.
It really, I agree with you. I think it really is. I think there's something later on in the same section, you again evidently had a great relationship with Tom Koulopoulos. And I know that I have a lot of listeners who own their own company or CEOs of companies that listen to the show all over the world, by the way. By the way, I just want to say to the 80 plus countries around the world, hey, welcome to the show. Please tell your friends, give us a positive review. And also to everybody in the US on AM, FM 24/7, listening to us across the country. Thank you. Tell your radio station, you love the show, and that would be great too. We certainly do that. And I also need to point out that we are also on at Belfast, Ireland, on a local radio station there, and also in the Philippines. So welcome all of you over there. Tom Koulopoulos, and labels are sometimes useful for CEOs and entrepreneurs and founders, coined the term uncertainty principle. And I think the idea that as uncertainty increases, the time to react decreases really resonates with today's leader. Would you
Absolutely.
know? I mean, right?
Absolutely. And you see that reflected in the comments of others throughout the book, and not just current leaders, but as you know, there's a story I tell about a woman who is a senior executive at Airbnb now, but used to work at Darden at the University of Virginia in the business school, where they're training leaders. And she made exactly the same observation, that even in this, it's really a model when you're going to school, right? It's not the real world, but you're practicing for the real world. You're learning about the real world. And even in that context, students felt like they didn't have enough time to react to what they were learning, to react to how fast what they were learning was changing. So to me, that's a strong indicator that it's not just what you just said, but it is so pervasive, further than we think it goes, and deeper than we think it goes.
Yeah, Melissa Thomas Hunt, I think that's who you're talking about, who was with the Virginia Darden School of Business and then Airbnb, right? Is that correct?
Correct. That's correct.
And then I'm not shocked at this, right? I think you point out in the book, and I think we all are maybe hopefully getting to see this, but as the pandemic hit us, we got exposed into uncertainty. If you didn't understand that you were in uncertain waters before, you clearly now you better have your eyes open. If you're a C-suite professional, you better have your eyes open to the fact that you're in uncertain water, and terribly uncertain waters.
Absolutely. And I'll give you an echo factor to that. So, we were just talking about a CEO survey that was done several years ago, pre-pandemic, which is a great indicator. So now let's talk about one that just happened in the last few months. So McKinsey and Company went out, and they have great access to leaders as well. They surveyed over 1,000 leaders and over 3,000 employees. So anybody up and down the chain from there. And they asked both groups about a post-pandemic world and a return to the office. And what did they think about it? And to your C-suite observation, 75%. Now, remember, this is public. This is not confidential like those CEO surveys, but 75% of leaders talked in terms of a finish line, of a new normal, of business as usual returning soon and lasting. So, despite what they're saying privately, that publicly they're acting as though this is all over, as though COVID, which was an extreme form of uncertainty, is the last time, or that it's over in and of itself. Here's the interesting contrast. 70% of employees don't believe them.
Right.
So you tie that to these numbers where, and it's not just tied to a disconnect that leaders, at least publicly, seem to have from this reality around us. There are lots of reasons, but look at the numbers of people leaving work voluntarily. I mean, yesterday they were just announcing that in August, 4.5 million voluntarily vacated their positions. McKinsey's saying by the end of the year, almost 60% of people are contemplating leaving their current jobs because they see the uncertainty around them, right, and they know they need something new and different to deal with it. And they're looking to their leaders, and their leaders are saying, remain calm, everything will be okay, And I think we all know that's not a reality. This isn't a quick event, and there's no quick fix to it.
And this is where rebel leadership comes into play, I think, better than anything that I've read to this point. So the mindset. Help us understand rebel and leadership, because the two definitions, as you define them, we may not be thinking what you're thinking when we try to put those two words together. So help us understand and define those.
Sure. And I think of rebel leadership as actually a new term. And you could oversimplify and say it's a combination of the best of both. So the rebel side I'm talking about is not the throw caution to the wind risk taker, taking risk for the sake of risk. I'm talking about the individual who's open. I'm talking about the individual who, think about your physical zone of life, your physical area, right? They have this awareness of their environment. They have an awareness of the other people around them. They are willing to now think about this emotional side of what you're talking about. They're willing to shut up and listen to where others are coming from, to take that in. So that's the kind of rebel I'm talking about, because guess what that kind of rebel is? They're not only the ones that are open, they're the ones that are best able to adapt. They tend to be the most innovative. They experiment, they tap their creative side. These are all the good parts of a rebel that we admire. On the leadership side, I'm not just talking about leaders who have a bunch of followers. I'm talking about the kind of leader who recognizes that it's her or his responsibility to create an environment where everyone can lead. And in these uncertain times, what we need is the best of both of those. We need that openness, innovativeness, and adaptability in everyone. And we need that consciousness that we're looking to create an environment where everybody can step up and lead, rather than all of us supporting one leader who can't possibly have all the answers. So that's how the term is new and different to me. And it's made to fit the times and the environment we're in.
By the way, beautifully put. First of all, we're going to dig into this a little bit more here. Chapter 1, the changing landscape of leadership, our new abnormal. Caught my attention right away. We've kind of hinted at it in an opening in your introduction, but I want people to be reminded that we live in a VUCA world. Mm-hmm. VUCA, for those of you who are listening, which means volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. We've had people on the show who've talked about living in a VUCA world before. But I do not think that we give it nearly as much credence as we probably should, because I don't think we really truly understand the volatility. We're describing it, but I don't think we really know just how volatile it is. I don't think we really know how uncertain it is. I don't think we really understand how complex it is. And I know for darn sure that we don't know the ambiguity of it.
Yes. I think that's absolutely true. So I'll add to that. I'll build on your shoulders here.
Please.
Uh, it it's that and two other things. When this term first came about, it was around the year 2000. It was actually developed and certainly used by the military to describe the new environments that they were encountering. So these are terrorist environments, and primarily overseas is what they were referring to, where the enemy doesn't behave like you expect them to. The enemy changes its priorities, changes its players day to day, and how it goes about doing things. The rules of engagement no longer apply. And what the military found was everything in their system, from how they recruited to how they trained, how they designed weaponry and technology, how they used it, how they strategized, all of that was based on assumptions about certain things operating as they always would. And then they look out in this environment that they were running into in Iraq in particular and said, oh my God, this is volatile, it's uncertain, it's complex, and it's ambiguous. And if we don't change the way we do things, fundamentally change the way we do things, not just for this theater of war, not just for this month or the next few years or however long we're here, but if we don't change in total, we will no longer be the leading military power in the world. So what's interesting about VUCA is, as that term came out, lots of people used it, and they used it to point over there. Oh, that situation is VUCA. Oh, that she really has to deal with this VUCA kind of environment. That was 2000. Everything has just amplified and expanded since then. The world in 2021 is not VUCA here or there. It's everywhere. It's in everything we do. It's even in who we are and how we operate. So COVID was the most universal example of that, but it's far from the last. And here's the thing. I want to make sure that your listeners and those that are, watching us live here understand that this is not bad news.
Right.
It's just reality. And so the bad news only comes when we ignore that this new abnormal is here to stay. Because the book, even though it starts by saying, listen, you really have to take a closer look at this uncertainty and what it means and how far it goes, how deep and how broad. But at the end of it, the bulk of the book, right? 6 chapters are about organizations and individuals that are thriving in these uncertain times and what the patterns are across them. But one of the key things is they recognize that VUCA is here to stay, and they've embraced that, and they're building from there rather than trying to fight it or to pretend that just around the corner things are going to go back to the way they were. That's the distinction.
His name is Larry Robertson. The book is entitled Rebel Leadership. I told you he was great, didn't I? You're listening to him here on A New Direction. Hey, everyone, listen, Epic Physical Therapy, my physical therapist, and I think they should be your physical therapist too, right? It doesn't matter if you're recovering from an injury or surgery, or you could be just wanting to move a little bit better, or maybe you're a professional athlete or any athlete that just wants to improve the way that you're doing what you do on your field of play. Listen, they will provide you with a customized treatment program that's made just for you, because they do understand the need to treat the entire body as a functional whole, not just your symptom or your injury. So when you're ready for your epic relief, your epic recovery, and your epic results, start with Epic Physical Therapy. That's epicpt.com, EPICPT.com. And Linda Craft and Team Realtors. More than 35 years. They have been at the top of the real estate game, and they continue to do so because they have rebel leadership. They do. You know what? Here's the thing. Linda has understood that over the course of time, that as things change, she has to change with the times, meaning that she can't just lead herself. She has to have other people help her lead. And that's why she has a team of leaders that really help her lead her organization, her real estate company, right? I mean, that's why she has she has team leaders in training, and she has team leaders in marketing. She has team leaders in with web and internet and all those interfaces. She understands that the leadership has to constantly be moving, because you know what? Things are changing, and she's changed with them. And that's why for 35 years, that's how you stay at the top of your game, and make sure you put your priorities first, which is, you know what? People. Because at the end of the day, it's not P&Ls are not profit and losses. It's people and lives. And she understood that from the beginning. So when you're ready to sell your home, buy your home, start with the people who understand what P&Ls really are. Start with Linda Craft and Team Realtors. You can learn more by going to lindacraft.com. That's LINDACRAFT.com. AFT.com. And we're back here on A New Direction with Larry Robertson and his outstanding book, Rebel Leadership. And we're kind of just getting started here, but now we're going to start moving up the pace a little bit. And we're going to jump right over into chapter 2, because I think chapter 2 is really important. Let Them Laugh is the title of the chapter. Soul matters most. And I have people who I am sure are watching us live or are listening to this and maybe driving down the road, listening to this and going, whoa, 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 whoa. What do you mean soul matters? Larry, have you lost it? Here, we were talking about rebel leadership. Now you're going into the soul. What are you talking about here?
Yeah, it's interesting too. I felt it was very important as I moved out of talking about the environment in the book to make that the first chapter of the book. And let me tell you a story to explain the reason. In my first book, A Deliberate Pause, which was focused on entrepreneurship, I interviewed more than 220 people in and around the entrepreneurial universe, entrepreneurs and people who support them, people who work in their organizations and so on. And at the end of these interviews, I would ask this question: is there anything that stood out more than everything else that mattered to you through the highs and the lows and, through this journey you call the entrepreneurial journey? And almost to the person, the answer they gave back was soul. It was a word that they chose. And they didn't mean something religious, although, they almost talk about it in a reverential, spiritual way. But what it was for them was a sense of identity, of their identity, but importantly, their identity in what they did and how that connected to and impacted others. And having that sense of that was the thing that they turned to recommit, to recalibrate, to reinvent what they had to do. It was the thing they believed drew people to them. And most importantly, it was the only reliable asset when things got truly uncertain. So stepping back from that and further interviews I've done with dozens and dozens of people, my second book, I interviewed nearly 70 MacArthur Fellows. This is the award often called the Genius Award for these incredibly creative people across fields. They talked about it. For this new book, again, soul kept coming up. And when it comes up that often across that many sectors and lives and jobs and individuals, people of such a range of backgrounds, boy, I'll tell you, if you're not paying attention to it, then you're making a mistake. So what they were saying is having that grounding of your identity in what you do and how it connects to and impacts others is critical to anything else you might do beyond that, especially if you're trying to do it in a world that keeps changing. And that's why soul matters most. Okay,
so let's talk about, I know that we're using the word identity here, but let's try to help out the listener here a little bit in terms of, maybe, because we have a semantic issue,
especially around this topic.
Yeah. Yep. And, the issue is, okay, all right, Larry, so I don't even know if I believe I have a soul. So can I find a soul? Help us put a little bit of maybe meat to the soul.
Sure. So let me do a complete flip of the coin and take you into science for a minute. So there's a professor and a researcher up at Columbia, Adam Galinsky, and his studies are around, I'm going to use my words, but they're around the degree to which people are willing to be bold or not. And he actually talks about everyone having a range of boldness that extends from not being bold enough and therefore not stepping up to what you need to, and being too bold where you turn other people off, right? And what he says is the key not only to knowing that range, but expanding that range of boldness. And think about this. This is what you would tap to deal with uncertainty. This is what you would tap to put forth a new idea. This is what you would tap to raise your hand and say, listen, something's wrong here. I don't know what it is, but we need to fix it. I mean, boldness takes all sorts of forms. To reach out and say as a leader, I don't have the answers to this. I need some help here. All of that is within that range of boldness. And what he says it boils down to is two things, like how much you know the range and how big it is. What you know about yourself and what other people believe about you. So when we talk about soul, we're in the context that I'm talking about it. This is really about what you know about yourself. It's not identity in the sense of saying, I'm Larry Robertson and I'm an author. No. This is about, it connects closer to why you exist in the world, no matter what you're doing, where you are at this point, even if you don't know everything about yourself. It's just an awareness of who you are. And when it gets to that part about and what you do and how it connects to others, that's what impacts and influences how other people perceive you and what they believe about you. So this idea of soul is really about thinking about, well, what enables me to be bold and also sensitive to know when it's time to be more bold and when it's time to be less bold. That's another way of looking at this.
When I was in graduate school, I had one of my favorite classes was a social psychology class that I took. And we used to talk about the self, the true self, the heart of who we are. And I kept going back to that when you were talking about this. I kept hearing over and over again, Irving Goffman, who wrote Asylum's great social psychologist who, talked about we put on masks and because we don't want, depending on our audience, because we don't want them to see what we really are. But it is that piece of us of what we really, really, truly are that if we let come forth, gives us our authenticity and gives us that ability to be vulnerable versus disclosure and allows us to actually share that with others so that we now have become something greater than ourselves. Did I mix those two metaphors too badly? Or
No, you absolutely did not. So here's the thing. I'm going to give you a response for everyone. Okay. So for some people, your response is the response. It's how do I connect with who I truly am? And you know what? There's some people in our lives, they want to dig for that. They want to spend time in it. They dwell in it sometimes. Okay. And that's not a bad thing.
No.
It's just that isn't everybody. So let me give you an answer on the other side. The more you know about yourself, whatever it is, what your strengths are, what your weaknesses are, right? Go back to the 4 areas you always ask your audience about. What's your score right now?
Right.
Are you a 3? Okay. It runs the range from the depths of who you truly are to simply being tuned in and aware of who you are in a certain set of circumstances. And this is the thing you pointed out earlier. This isn't about whether you're a 3 or a 5 or a 10. It's about knowing where you are and having a sense of where it is you're trying to go. Not from a 3 to a 10 by tomorrow, but a 3 to a 3.5 by tomorrow, by the end of the week. If it takes all month, at least you have the awareness of where you need to be, right? And the reason I reference the boldness is if you look at the data across the sciences out there, even in management science, even in some of the studies McKinsey does, those who lock down when things get uncertain, they try to batten down the hatches, not change anything, control more, are the ones who end up losing more. Those who open up or take the attitude of go bold or go home, they're the ones that tend to see the opportunity, see a way out of the problem, and see when there's the opportunity to work with others to overcome what the hurdle is. That all starts with self-awareness. No matter how small or how large you define it, it's still powerful. So it applies to everybody.
I love that. I just think it's such an important piece. And by the way, nobody ever talks about. I've never read the hundreds of books I've read. Nobody's ever talked about the soul in terms of its importance, and in terms of leadership. It's just tremendously important, and you did a beautiful job defining.
I appreciate you pointing that out. Here's an interesting distinction too, because we're going to get to this as well. Some people try to skimp on it and say, "Do you have a purpose?" And it's not to say that an individual purpose isn't important, but it's not the same thing as that self-awareness of who you are in the context of what you do and how it connects to others. So I think that's a skimp. But I also think that that's people recognizing that you've got to know about yourself before you can contribute to a group or a cause or a company or whatever else it might be.
Well, and I would also say though, Larry, that I don't think you can really truly have a purpose if you're not sure of your soul.
That is true.
I mean, I'm not convinced that, if I don't know who I really am, how can I be sure that I'm really fulfilling the purpose that I'm meant to fulfill?
Great question. And I think if people ask that, like you ask them to ask themselves, where are you ranking, right, in your 4 areas of life? If now and then you asked that question about, well, do I have a purpose? Oh, wait a minute. Who am I in this context? What's my identity in this context, right? At the very least, there are a lot of people who walk around and declare a purpose. Right. And then a lot of those people end up frustrated when it doesn't fulfill them, or it's never accomplished, or it changes all the time. And I would just say that that's because there's a disconnect between their soul, as I use the term, right, and what that purpose is. I mean, sometimes we pick our purpose because some outside force influences us to do that, or tells us to do that. A boss tells us to do that. Right. And that's not the same thing.
I'll take this a step further. I'm not sure that you could possibly know what your passions are if you don't know who you are.
Yep.
And to me, when passion meets purpose, because we know who we are, that's your perfect scenario. But I don't think you can have passion and purpose if you're not sure of your own identity and who that person really is, and what's in the depth of who that person is.
So I totally agree with that, but I'm always sensitive to those who invest less time in thinking about this. Right. And I am not being critical when I say that. I'm just saying it's just a fact that they don't. And so my sensitivity to them here is to say, what do you want at the end of the day? And if what you want is, take these uncertain times, if what you want is not just to survive them, but to thrive in them, to feel like adaptability is something that is a skill set of yours and something you actually want to do in some circumstances versus something you dread and can't wait to get it over with and so on. You've got to be connected in some way to knowing who the heck you are and what drives you. So whether you call that soul or purpose, and whether you ultimately realize that that helps to define what you get passionate about, that combination of things is your greatest source of strength and direction when things get all topsy-turvy. It just is.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely agree. And I kind of rushed over something, but you just reminded me, in this leadership world that we live in, this VUCA world, right, that we live in, you talk about this in the book, that we fall into the mistake of believing that creativity is the sole answer to the problem.
Right.
And so we tend to rely on 3 things, right? I think you talk about problem solving, creativity, and adaptability. Mm-hmm. Right? But they're really kind of all 3 the same thing, if we really, right? Aren't they in a sense?
That's right. And so this is interesting. And part of the reason I went there is because in these leadership studies we talked about, after they ask leaders the question, what's the environment like? And they say it's unpredictable. They say, well, what do you most need to deal with that? And for almost a dozen years, the answer was creativity. Well, what the heck does that mean? Right. And if you look at how they changed their organizations based on that answer, we need more creativity because the world is asking us to respond to so many new things and so many changes, they didn't do anything to change it. Or they hired people that they said, well, gosh, she got her degree in the arts. She must be creative. I mean, very little thought goes into that, right? And let's pretend that person they hire, she was in fact creative. They didn't change the way the organization was driven. They didn't change the incentives. They didn't change the job descriptions. They didn't change the shared purpose of the organization. So that creative person withers on the vine. So I looked at all that and said, I don't think creativity is what you really want. It's not that you don't need it, but I think what you want is adaptability. And adaptability builds into it the ability to problem solve, the ability to create and innovate and so on. So then you back out of that and say, all right, what does it take to be truly adaptable? And that's the path we're on. It starts with knowing your soul, but it extends much, much more into the people you try to do these things with.
Adaptability is huge. I recalling back in grad school, and we were we were, here, these young psychologists, right? And we're in grad school, and, people trying to define intelligence. And, we had the clinicians over there trying to do intelligence, practicing their intelligence testing. And we're trying to talk about what is intelligence? What does that really look back like? And I'll never forget my friend, Mike Longnecker, who was with me in grad school, said, I think intelligence, if you want to define intelligence, it's adaptability. And I thought about that for a second in light of your book. And I was like going, you know what? The truth of the matter is, the more adaptable we are in this VUCA world, we actually are being more intelligent.
No question. And you could put a big set of, rock concert speakers on that and amplify it to say, the more that we understand that and realize that we are at our best when it comes to adaptability, when we do it together, when we co-create, when we collaborate. And so we are built for this. I mean, the science on it is really quite stunning to show just how much we expect other people to be there to help us, to back us with our ideas, to when we want to change something to the positive, to follow us. And the slightest hint we get the opposite direction, we shut down our ability to adapt and create. So what you're saying is so critical. And we're this tribal species. We want to do these things together. Why would we stop doing that when we need to adapt most, which is right now?
I love that. His name is Larry Robertson. The book, Rebel Leadership. Are you enjoying it? Of course you are. I knew you would. Hey, you know what? And you listen to him here on A New Direction. Hey, folks, Epic Physical Therapy, my physical therapist, and hopefully yours soon. Not because you have to, but because you want to, right? That's the thing about physical therapy. I don't want you to go because you're injured, although they do handle injury. I don't want you to go because you had surgery, right? I want you to go because maybe you want to move a little bit better. Maybe you want to feel a little bit better. They have all the tools. All their facilities have all the latest equipment, the anti-gravity treadmill, the Normatec compression sleeves, the game ready with the ice and the compression. Listen, they're certified in the most cutting edge, bleeding edge treatments, blood flow restriction therapy, dry needling, cupping. That's just a few. When you're ready for your epic relief, epic recovery, and epic results, don't look any further. Go to epicpt.com. That's EPICPT.com. And Linda Craft and Team Realtors, you know what? Here's the deal. She and her team are out there right now trying to work for you. They are in constant learning mode, trying to figure out what is the latest, greatest, best thing that they can do. But ultimately what they're trying to do is they're trying to find a way to relate to you, to get you what you want and need when it comes to your home needs, whether that's selling your home or buying your next home or buying your first home, right? Regardless of where you're at in the world, they want to work for you. So why not put them to work? Why not go to the people who want to work for you because it is you? Go to Linda Craft and Team Realtors. It's lindacraft.com. That's LINDACRAFT.com. And we're back here on A New Direction and talking with, I'm going to call him my new friend, Larry Robertson. I think we're going to wind up being really good friends because we certainly seem to be speaking the same language here for sure. Insightful. It's fun conversation. I got to be honest with you. I've enjoyed it. I hope you have.
For me too. Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah. And so it's funny, Jake, there's one thing I was reflecting on that we've talked about, and we're almost referring to it directly, but not quite. And I want to make sure we call it out. Sure. We keep referring to this word leadership. And I want to make sure that I clarify here that when I talk about that now and in Rebel Leadership, I am not doing what we typically do. Typically, we equate the individual leader with leadership as though that person is the sum total of leadership, all the ideas, all the answers, and everything else. I mean, we tend to think about leaders through this false hero lens, and then it shades how we think about leadership. Leadership is a shared human capacity. So this whole book is about the need and the opportunity and really the ability we have to step up to that, to everybody to lead in their own way. It doesn't mean everybody's going to be the CEO, but right. Everybody fits a situation where they bring more to the problem than anybody else, where they are the answer. They have the mastery. That's the kind of leadership I'm talking about, and creating those environments that enable that.
Well, and I think that's a perfect segue into chapter 3, leadership moves.
It does.
I,
Or it should.
I don't know. I can't think of a better way. I can't think of a better way for us to lead into that, because it's really true, right? I mean, that's part of rebel leadership, is that leadership moves.
Yeah.
And people are going to go, well, what does he mean that leadership moves? Well, so
Yeah.
I'm going to hand that over to you.
And I will respond to it with another simple story. So just think about ancient human tribes, right? In those tribes, wherever they occurred, whether they were, on this continent or another one, was there a chief? Often there was. But on any particular day, the leader might be the medicine woman, or the hunters, or the gatherers, or the people who broke down camps season to season and organized how we moved. The point was that whatever the environment called for, whatever the needs were for leadership, the right person stepped forward to provide that. It wasn't always the chief. And the reason we're all here is because that worked for ancient human societies. And it really still works. You talk about uncertain times now, think about the times they lived in, right? And so they found that the best way to deal with uncertainty was to create this environment where everybody could lead. So what we're talking about is allowing leadership to move rather than to have it concentrated in a single person all the time. And it really leads to a higher level and a steadierness in peak performance of a team or a group. That's what leadership moving means. But let me add one more thing to it. A lot of leaders are afraid of this. I mean, truly allowing leadership to move. I'm talking about leaders by position, right? So the CEO doesn't want to do that. And the reason is they're afraid that it'll just turn into chaos, that anybody who steps up to lead will lead in their own unique direction. But that's not the case if a team, an organization, a tribe has a shared purpose, right? Something that they all help define, something that they continue to refine together, something that they use as a barometer and a litmus test for everything they do to make sure they're on track of it. That's what allows leadership to move in actually an organized way and a very powerful, impactful way, rather than being chaotic. That's the kind of leadership moving that I'm talking about here.
Well, and it goes further in that you talk about Stolberg and Magnus, who co-authored the book Peak Performance, Elevate Your Game, Avoid Burnout, Thrive with the New Science of Success. They talk about that if you are going to have repeated peak performance, leadership has to not only move, it has to be shared, right? And you have to be proactively open, and you're going to have to probably embrace some discomfort.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. In fact, what they found is that the two keys to continued peak performance and peak performance over longer periods of time was extreme openness. I mean, a willingness to really let go and even to let others lead, and extreme discomfort, where you're experimenting at a high level. You're also experimenting in a way that you want it to work, but it might not work. There might be pain with it. So that openness and that discomfort is the key to peak performance. The way that you level out the noise that comes from extreme openness or extreme discomfort is by sharing the responsibility of how you lead through it. Then others can absorb the noise, they can counteract it with their skills. So they really talk about both, those are the keys to peak performance, and you get more benefit when you do it together.
Well, if we're talking about together, that sounds like a nice introduction to chapter 4. It's the culture, stupid. Right? to borrow, I'm not calling you stupid. I'm not even calling you out there stupid. That's just the name of the title of the chapter. It's the culture, stupid. So chapter 4, right? Because all of this ultimately is about a culture when we're talking about rebel leadership. We have to do this together, but we have to have a culture that embraces that. And it's not going to be comfortable. And it means that leadership is going to move. I'm working my way back, which means that there's going to have to be some sort of an identity to get there. Right? Because without identity, I'm not going to have a culture, right? And moving forward. So I'll be stupid for a minute. Let's talk about it's the culture, Jay. Stupid.
Well, it's interesting, and I'm borrowing the old James Carville advice to Bill Clinton the first time he ran for office, saying it's the economy, stupid. If you don't get that, then
Right.
you don't get anything, including votes and success in your administration, whatever else might come. And this is really how leaders in these thriving organizations described it. Culture isn't just important because they talk about it. Now, Deloitte did these surveys a couple of years ago where when they asked about the importance of culture, 94% of executives and 88% of everybody else in the organization said, oh yeah, culture matters. And then what they found was only a third of those people were even aware of what their culture was or of how their actions tied to it. So for these organizations where culture is the thing, they think of culture, first of all, as a competitive advantage. So they invest in it, they attend to it, they cultivate it, right? And the other important thing, and this was pointed out by several people, including Russell Schaefer, who's the Senior Director of Global Culture, Diversity, and Inclusion at Walmart, they're big on culture. They talk about it all the time. So I said, well, Russell, what is it then? He said, look, it's the things we do and are doing right now. It's not who we were or who we aspire to be. It's this litmus test of our words and our values and our decisions and our actions in every moment by every person every single day. And then Melissa Thomas Hunt, who you referred to earlier, who is at Airbnb, head of global diversity and belonging. She goes further and says, listen, this is about how people behave, how they engage, what they give currency to, the markers of their language, what's sanctioned and taboo. So people who are finding that it is the culture stupid, that is the most powerful tool, are actually living it and using it as a competitive advantage. That's how I would describe why I say it's the culture stupid, because that's the thing that's powering these thriving organizations.
And what's interesting is the Deloitte that you talk about in this chapter, they found out what truly made exceptional organizations. They found some common patterns, didn't they?
Mm-hmm. They did. And it's simple things, right?
Right.
Culture is talked about and everybody's engaged in it. And it is not just spoken from on high, it is amplified from the leader on down. I mean, they broke it down to one simple sentence that had all these parameters that say, if you have all these things, then you are truly attending to culture. And you look at them and you say, oh my gosh, we talk about culture in the C-suite, but everybody down the line doesn't feel like they really belong. Deloitte is already saying you're missing then what culture really means when it becomes a valuable asset. So it's really quite simple things, but ultimately it's about what Russell said. It's who you are right now and using that as a litmus test for your actions and decisions across the board.
So let's jump ahead. All right. We've given people, by the way, we've given people a pretty good taste of this book, but let's jump way ahead and say, okay, so Larry, how do I get my organization to become part of this rebel leadership movement?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So there's a couple of things here. I'm going to go back to am I a 3 on this area of my life? Okay, well, what are we really talking about here? We're talking about going to 3.5. The reason I reference that is that one of the ways that you get going here, as much as we all feel in a rush to have a solution, is to realize that this is an incremental process. Now, the more people involved in it, the faster it can move, but it goes step by step. So number one, whatever you do, realize that you aren't going to wave some magic wand and then everything's perfect again. But here are some questions that I would suggest that if you're an individual leader out there, if you're just an individual within an organization who hasn't had the chance to lead yet, you can ask these questions of yourself, even better as a group. They come from one of the MacArthur fellows I interviewed. Her name is Deb Meyer, and she calls them the 5 habits of the mind. And they're 5 questions. How do we know what we know? It's a chance to question your assumptions and make sure you're in tune with the changing environment. Is there a pattern? Because sometimes we learn something new and it's just an anomaly. And you know what? We don't care. When it's a pattern, it's something meaningful. Some form of the question, what if, is the 3rd habit of the mind. What if we solved the problem this way? What if we tried that? What? 4th pattern, is there another way? Because guess what? There's always another way. So this is really a message about remaining open. And the 5th and final habit of the mind is who cares? How does what we're doing connect to the people we want it to impact? So if you start to ask those questions and think in that way, from how do we know what we know to is there a pattern to what if to is there another way to look at it and who cares, you gradually start shifting your entire culture. And the more people you involve in that, the faster and more effective it is. Here's the key though. Most people think of changing their cultures as like stepping off a cliff. And then once they make those first moves, they realize it's more like a curb. You've got to make the first move, and you have to do it committed to making culture your competitive advantage.
That's beautiful. Do you realize we've already covered an hour?
I know it goes fast, doesn't it? But the book is short, and that's important.
We've covered an hour. The book, Rebel Leadership. Awesome. Seriously, Larry, awesome. How to Thrive in Uncertain Times, Rebel Leadership. Pick it up, bookstores near you, Amazon for sure. Great book. You're going to enjoy it. It's hard to put down once you pick it up. I'm just telling you, you'll be intrigued because it's something so different and so unique. I really encourage you to pick up your copy of Rebel Leadership. Larry, thank you. Hang on with me. Folks, that's the show. Listen, I tell you what, there are two things that you're always in control of, and that's your attitude and your effort. Regardless of what's happening in your world, you can always control your attitude and your effort. Do that, right? You can always work a little harder, and it doesn't matter. You can always change your attitude. I'm going to be back next week with another great guest. It's going to be another great show. It's going to be another great book. And as I say to my friends in India who speak Hindi, namaste.